website, ouspacesociety.org. We're the official society for all things space related for the Open University. If you are a student and you log into your student homepage, you can usually find us in the resources tabs there if you're doing space and science and physics related topics. We're completely free to join. We're completely funded by our merchandise, which is now for sale on our website. Got me mug. And we have some brilliant hoodies and our Captain Tardigrade, which is our mascot. You can get one of them over there. So please that. But anyway, I'll stop talking about myself because you've probably heard me say that several times before. So what I'll do is hand over our speaker, who's Craig Brown today. He's the Vice President of Space Tech Company SatixFy. I hope I pronounced that right. And he's going to talk about diversity inclusion in the space sector and why it's vital to us all. In his own words, he's from the wrong side of the tracks in Swansea. I didn't know there was a wrong side of the tracks in Swansea, but I guess we'll find out about that. And he's also an executive role with SatixFy, but he's come via the University of Leicester's Physics Department, the European Space Agency, Airbus, and the UK government. So sure Craig will explain himself a lot better than I just did. So over to you, Craig.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the kind invitation to kind of join you tonight. And as you said, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of diversity and inclusion. So I'm just going to try and kind of pull up a couple of slides. You let me know kind of if this works.
Yeah, all good. We see that.
You can see that okay?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it's kind of not putting it onto main presenter view. So stand by while I fix that. Sorry, it's a new laptop and everything is slightly configured weirdly compared to my work one. So
no worries, we are experts in tech issues.
Unfortunately, yes, we are.
Always the way, yeah. For some reason, it's not going into presenter view. So what I will do is just show it as it is. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do. See if that works. Let me know if that works for you.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So as I said, the kind of topic of the talk is a meandering journey through UK space. I thought what I would do, given the kind of topic, was something ever so slightly different to what is often done when somebody comes and talks about diversity. And instead of giving you lots of kind of statistics about the sector and things like that, I thought I would give a bit of a testimony, a kind of a personal journey of what it's like to be somebody who is gay and perhaps from a kind of a disadvantaged background, kind of financially, to kind of just give a kind of first-hand account, really, of what it's like to kind of go through the space sector. So start then with the kind of usual introduction that you'd have at one of these talks. So as you mentioned, I work for a company called SatixFy. My job title is Vice President of Major Programs. It's a bit of a business development type job where I'm responsible for kind of government relationships predominantly for the company, but that includes the Space Agency, so European Space Agency, UK Space Agency. But I also work very closely with a lot of our partner companies and a lot of our customers. I've been with SatixFy for the last 2.5 years or so, but before that I joined the company from Innovate UK, which is the UK government's innovation agency. And Innovate UK is a really interesting place to work. I was responsible for a significant part of the UK government's investment programme in new companies. So I was investing around about £100 million a year into various companies across the telecommunications and the commercial space sector. So real privileged kind of aerial view, if you like, of the UK space sector and in the kind of commercial bit of space. But before I joined Innovate UK and looked after that part of the space program, I worked for Airbus Defence and Space. I had a couple of interesting roles there. I started out in the kind of science part of the business, designing space missions for Airbus. So we would win contracts to develop space missions for the European Space Agency, and I did that for around about 4 years before stepping over to a bit more of a commercial role and an innovation role within the company, where I was developing new commercial services based on assets that Airbus had in space. I joined Airbus from my PhD, so I did a PhD at the University of Leicester. My PhD was in space instrumentation, and a significant part of my PhD was on the Bepi-Colombo mission, so the MIX instrument, the X-ray spectrometer instrument that's on its way to Mercury and had its first flyby of the planet a few days ago, actually, which was quite exciting to see. And I joined my PhD, so it was sponsored by the European Space Agency. I joined Leicester to do my PhD from ESA. So when I first left university, I went and kind of got onto a young graduate traineeship where I spent a few years out in the Netherlands. And so really kind of like cut my teeth in my first job as a space mission designer. That was a really interesting an exciting role, particularly for somebody straight out of university. The first thing I did when I left university was sign on. It took me around about 6 months to get a job from graduation. So my first 6 months was spent kind of visiting the job centre in Swansea fairly frequently. And it was a bit of a bizarre scenario for them, I'm sure, because most of the people that they see don't have master's degrees in physics with space science and technologies. That was always a little bit of a curious trip for us all. So I think when I say that I've had a meandering journey, a meandering career, I think you can see from the type of organizations that I've mentioned that actually I haven't really spent much time in one type of organization. I've done my time in academia. I've worked for the European Space Agency. I've worked for UK government. I've worked for a large business. I'm now working for a relatively small business. For a couple of years in that time, I was also a trustee of UK SEDS. I was involved in UK SEDS when I was a student too. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that I've meandered in my career so far. So as I say, what I wanted to do was to kind of talk a little bit about my kind of background and my history, so you could understand kind of where I came from and some of the kind of moments of challenge, I'd say, through my kind of career in the space sector. So we'll start at the beginning. So this is some kind of very early pictures of me. That's me on the right on my first day of primary school. This is my nursery picture in the middle. And I remember when I was putting this kind of presentation together, I was kind of digging out these pictures, and I must say when I look at this picture, it's kind of like, it's nice, but it's also a little bit sad. Two of the children in the picture are unfortunately died. So two of them died from heroin overdoses actually before they were 25. Another one died from committing suicide when she was 18. One of my friends in the picture is an alcoholic, and one of them's a drug addict. So we joke that I came from the wrong side of the tracks in Swansea, but certainly the kind of type of school that I went to, my primary school and indeed my secondary school, there wasn't really much expectation that anyone from my area would go on to university even. So that was just the sort of place where I grew up. One thing to say, two of the people in that picture are gay, including me, and one of my friends, Nicola, had two mums. So even back in Swansea, on the wrong side of the tracks, as it were, there were gay people. Gay people did exist. So when I was 10, so still in primary school, my parents split up, and that was quite a kind of a formative moment, I guess, in my life. So my dad left home, leaving my mother, my brother and sister, and myself. And that was obviously quite sad and had quite a big impact on us. I was the eldest. My brother Liam was 9 and my sister was 6. My mother suffered from depression, probably a little bit before then, but when my dad left, it was very clear that my mum was depressed, and so we kind of grew up in a childhood with a mum who kind of really struggled with her mental health. There were days where she couldn't get herself out of bed, and we had to put ourselves to school. That was quite frequent. We had no money, so we grew up on benefits. Our gas boiler broke when I was in primary school and was never fixed. So I grew up without central heating. We were on a gas meter and an electric meter. They would often run out and we'd be sitting there in the dark and, for about 2 or 3 days until my mother got some more money to be able to put some money on the meter. And so that was kind of like our childhood, but it was quite normal, I would say. It wasn't particularly kind of strange or surprising, and indeed many people kind of in the school that I went to would have been experiencing similar. But I did love going to school. I found school quite easy, so I didn't really have to try very hard in school, particularly in the early days. But I think one of the things that was a feature of my childhood was a very supportive family across the board, particularly my grandmother. I was brought up with ambition. So despite the hardship, I would always say that my grandmother in particular would tell me that I could be whatever I wanted to be and I could do whatever I wanted to do. So I always felt that there wasn't a limit on my ambition, despite perhaps the sort of school that I went to. So this is so then moved on to secondary school. So back in 1992 to 97. So this is I went up to the big school. It's quite a large secondary school in Swansea, and school was interesting and fun. I went, as I said, I found school quite easy, and I was quite good in school. So I was placed into top band for all of my subjects. As I said, it started quite well and really enjoyed it. I was good at most things, perhaps except PE, which I hated. Wasn't a big fan of that, and probably could do an hour's talk about why PE is such a rotten subject for a lot of people, particularly gay boys. I think it's a bit of a struggle, common theme amongst me and my friends today. But I will say that I gravitated towards kind of friendship circles with girls, and that was that's a bit of a feature of my life. Really, I've always found being friends with girls a lot easier perhaps than being friends with boys. And then on the picture on the right at the back, that's me with a few of my friends. 2 of the girls in that photo are gay, although at the time, again, we didn't know about it. Didn't know that we were gay friends, and that again is quite sad. I guess it was around this time that I started, realizing that I was gay and that I was kind of a bit different to the other boys around. But it's worth kind of pointing out that Section 28 was in full swing at this point in time, and so there was no kind of mention during my school days by teachers of what it was, what it is like to be gay, or gay relationships was never mentioned. In fact, the only one time that a teacher mentioned anybody being gay was during a kind of a first year sex education lesson, and he just kind of pronounced out of the blue that at least one person in the room was likely to be gay, and that was pretty much the only thing that was said about the topic. And of course, a lot of people turned to me as if it was obviously me. But I will say that I kind of hadn't really come to terms with my own sexuality at that point. But certainly, there was a kind of plenty of name calling and bullying as we went through school. It became a bit of a constant reality, really, as much from some girls as it was from some boys. Also had the bad luck of being a redhead as well, which gives people a little bit of extra ammunition, as it were. But I guess school was kind of all right. I think we all kind of, to a degree, experience a little bit of name calling and bullying. Academically, I guess I was quite creative. So during secondary school, I quite liked music and art, very good at that. But I also really enjoyed science. I was really kind of inquisitive, and kind of took the decision really that at that point, probably science was something that I wanted to do for a career more so than art and music. Probably because I felt that music and art is something that you can do in your spare time, whereas kind of science in your spare time is a little bit kind of less realistic, as it were. So I decided that I would kind of go down the science route. We were on free school meals, my brother, my sister, and myself. Although kind of in my secondary school, I used to sell my dinner ticket. So I used to go without lunch, and I used to sell my dinner ticket, which was worth £1. You'd be able to flog it for 50p to somebody else in school. And I would be saving up my 50p's as pretty much the only bit of money that I had. And my sister kind of likes to remind me that if it wasn't for the fact that I was selling my dinner tickets, she would never have been able to kind of buy tampons. So she when people talk about kind of period poverty, that was very much my sister. I used to have to kind of buy sanitary towels and stuff for her when she started having her period, and that's something that she still likes to remind me today, that was something that we had to do. I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. There wasn't much kind of help from school or people at home. Surrounded by people who'd never really been to university. Although in my mind, I don't think I ever thought that I wouldn't go to university. I always kind of knew that I wanted to kind of continue as far as I could go. I had lots of encouragement, but no real kind of direction from friends or family. And school wasn't much more use either, because as I say, the kind of expectation was that nobody in the school would likely go to university. But I did have a TV and got quite obsessed with Star Trek as a kid, and so in the absence of direction from anywhere else, I guess Jean-Luc Picard convinced me that I should probably do something spacey, and so that's kind of what I set my heart on when I was coming towards the kind of end of my GCSEs. I remember a meeting with my school careers advisor in my last year, and I told her that when I grew up I wanted to kind of design space missions for a living, and she told me to not be so unrealistic, and that I would probably make a good teacher, and that's what I should go and do. But as I say, thankfully my grandmother had kind of instilled in me this idea that if I wanted to do something, I could do it. And so that's what I did. I decided that I'm going to figure out what subjects, a space mission design I needed to study, and I would do those subjects. And that was my kind of sense of direction, really. So I decided that I was definitely going to design space missions, despite the advice from my careers advisor. But just to kind of remind us of what the kind of backdrop of that kind of sort of like 90s period were like. So these are some of the headlines really that were in the newspaper. This is the kind of backdrop and atmosphere that was created by the press. So the AIDS crisis was still very much a crisis. I'd say gay people were not liked. In fact, you could say they were hated by the kind of press. It was one of my kind of formative memories really was kind of in this time. I remember our dentist came out and there was a campaign run against the dentist, and pretty much there was kind of a mass exodus of parents taking their children, including mine, to move to a different dentist, and that was the sort of I'd say emotional backdrop to my own kind of feelings of my sexuality. And I'd say all of this kind of meant that I very much suppressed my sexuality in my own mind, and I didn't really come out to myself, as it were. But I did all right in my GCSEs. I got kind of A's and B's. Decided to kind of still keep on that path to space. And the school that I went to didn't have a sixth form, so I went on to Swansea College and spot the trend. Still always in amongst kind of girl social groups, and again, one of the girls in that middle picture there, one of my good friends, came out as a lesbian kind of later on. But again, at the time, we didn't know about each other, and this is very much a theme, I would say, of my childhood, is that one of the kind of big impacts of Section 28 and the fact that there was this kind of backdrop of hostility towards LGBT people in the press, it meant that all of us who were kind of queer kids, LGBT kids, kind of grew up not knowing about each other. And so our existences as children kind of going through that kind of formative puberty, kind of, discovering ourselves and kind of, in my case, not having relationships. And I think that was probably true of a lot of my gay friends in school. We didn't have relationships while all of the straight people around us were having kind of boyfriends and girlfriends. It just meant that we grew up quite lonely, I think, when it needn't have been like that, because we were with each other. We just didn't know about each other. So I went on to Swansea College. I didn't do the I didn't do A-levels. I went on and studied the International Baccalaureate. It was one of the few places in the country that offered the IB, actually, Swansea College, curiously. It was a very hard course. I found it hard, but my social life started to develop, I guess, by that point. To kind of put it in, put how difficult the course was into context, I guess. The course started with around about sort of 25 people on it. By the end of the course, 7 of us sat exams and 3 of us passed, including myself. So there was a huge attrition rate. It was quite a difficult thing to kind of go through. But I think one of the things that started to change around this time and was quite helpful to me was the kind of presentation of gay people and queer people in the media started to shift a little bit. And gone were the days where a kind of a gay kiss on EastEnders would cause outrage in the newspapers, and you started to see queer representation on television in particular. So Queer as Folk, This Life, two really important kind of TV programs that show gay people kind of in quite a positive light. So towards the end of my course, I did all right. Didn't do brilliantly. I struggled a little bit, but towards the end of the course, I started looking at kind of universities. I didn't really know where I wanted to go to university. I knew I wanted to do space, so that helped me narrow things down quite a lot, because back then there weren't that many universities that were doing space courses. Lots of places doing astrophysics, but I kind of had a feeling that I wanted to do something a bit more kind of on the edge of engineering and physics. And so I was looking at kind of space science and technology type courses. There was nobody really to help you in college, because even the college that I went to, they didn't really send many people to university. It sounds a bit daft, but a relatively small proportion of the people who went on to our college went on to university. So I kind of locked myself in the library. It was back in the day before universities did much kind of advertising online, perhaps with the exception of the OU, because of course they've always been a kind of a remote learning institute. So I had to kind of scour kind of paper prospectuses and the UCAS catalogue to try and figure out where I was going to go. I narrowed my choices down to 6. So back in those days, you had to choose 6 courses that you wanted to kind of apply for. University of Leicester was one of my choices, and it just so happened that the University of Leicester was the first university to invite me to an open day. And so I convinced my mother that we should go to this open day. But of course we couldn't afford to go, and that was a real issue for my mother. I think she didn't really want me to go away to university. I'd never been away before, and of course, as I say, she was still kind of suffering from depression, and so the idea that I was going to kind of leave was quite difficult for her. But I insisted that we find a way of going, and my aunt, my mum's sister, actually managed to borrow a car. And offered to drive us up to Leicester. So the 3 of us went up in the car from Swansea, and we saw the university. I loved it, the wonderful campus, the kind of people that we met on the day. They were lovely, really, really welcoming, very, very nice open day. and was very enthused. I didn't know much about Leicester in terms of where it sat in the league tables, or indeed its kind of history in space, as an institute that kind of has that kind of space flavor, that space specialism. And it was a bit of luck, really, in some respects, that one of the universities that I applied to was so kind of, space flavored. But all of the other universities then invited me to their open days, but it was hard enough for us to be able to afford to go to one open day, and so I wasn't able to see any of the other universities that I went to, and almost went to the University of Leicester by default. It was the first place to invite me to an open day. It was the only place I went to see, and therefore was the university that I attended. So I accepted my place at Leicester and went along and had a very good time. So I passed the International Baccalaureate, just about, scraped to pass, but went on to the University of Leicester, where I accepted a position on the MPhys, Physics with Space Science and Technology, so 4-year master's course. University was brilliant, loved it, made some amazing friends. I found the small handful of girls in physics and made very good friends with them, still friends to this day. Got involved in all sorts of things. So kind of got heavily involved in UK SEDS, joined the committee, looked after kind of education events and stuff for UK SEDS for a couple of years. Went on the Russia trip, if you ever have a chance to do that with UK SEDS, and if they still do it, that was brilliant. Kind of did university a little bit backwards, though. I was very diligent in my first year and my second year, but kind of as time went on, and honestly, as I started to come out to myself, so I didn't come out to myself until my third year of university. That was where I kind of met my first boyfriend. I kind of discovered a proper social life at that point, and so my third and final years, I probably went out a lot more than I should have. As I mentioned, I kind of met my first boyfriend, very handsome lad on the top left there. Met my best friend in the world, still best friends to this day, and had a whale of a time. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think one of the most important elements of somebody going to university is that kind of social kind of aspect, really, and that kind of life-changing experience, particularly as somebody who hasn't met the sort of people that you meet in university. I'd not really kind of met many people who'd been to university, so it was quite interesting. It was a bit weird to kind of have so many friends from private schools, because apparently that was a thing. That was something I'd never come across, people who'd been to private schools or boarding schools before. But yeah, when we talk about social mobility, and university as being key to the social mobility for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, I can say that I've lived that. I would never kind of go around referring to myself as a kind of a working class lad, looking at my lifestyle and my job that I have today, and the kind of circles that I move in today. It's very, very different to my friends that I still have back in Swansea. But it was absolutely kind of key to social mobility in my life. I kind of made up for lost time, really, in my later years of university. Very much discovered the joys of a gay social life, and Leicester back then had a very good gay social life. My degree kind of went all right. I discovered that my kind of natural ability in school kind of only took me so far, and there was a bit of a gap in my understanding of how to learn, and so I really struggled in university a little bit because of my inability to learn. Or the process of learning, really, and I have much respect for people who study through the Open University, because if it's one thing you have to have is that kind of discipline to kind of sit down and do your homework, and that was something that I often struggled with. I kind of realized I was much better at labs and project work than I was perhaps at exams, and at the time, kind of university was very exam heavy. I graduated in 2003 with a very solid kind of middle of the pack 2.2, which was absolutely fine. But in my mind, I kind of felt that I wanted to go on and do a PhD, and that 2.2 really kind of scuppered that plan. So at the time, PhDs were kind of few and far between. Research councils weren't funding PhDs kind of as as kind of much as they do perhaps today, or kind of certainly less than they do today. And so as a result, I was out of work for 6 months, moved back to Swansea, signed on to job seekers allowance. It was always also the time that I had to come out to my mother. So living at home, I felt like I wanted to come out to her. But also something that I kind of skipped was when a few years before my brother had also come out. So even though he was a little bit younger than me, back when I was 18, my brother kind of came out. So he was kind of 16, just turned in 17. And when my brother came out a few years earlier, I kind of saw the negative reaction that my mother had towards him coming out, and that kind of meant that I didn't really kind of have the confidence to come out to my mother and kind of, as I saw it then, put her through what my brother had put her through. Even though kind of in hindsight, that's a bit of a strange way to think about it. That's certainly the kind of way my mind was working at the time. But nevertheless, after university, I came out to her. It was kind of fine. She just kind of like shrugged and rolled her eyes a bit. It was quite nice, I guess, getting to know my brother properly for the first time, because up until that time, he didn't know about me, and I wasn't very open with him. So that kind of colored our relationship a little bit. After a while, kind of signing on, the European Space Agency published their young graduate trainee job program. All of their job descriptions landed on the website, and I was kind of looking through them and thinking, do you know what, I would really like to do one of these. I took some advice from one of my professors at the University of Leicester, who helped me decide which was the right kind of job to apply for. There was a lot of kind of stiff competition, I'd say, from around Europe for this job, and I didn't think that I had much of a shot. But nevertheless, I kind of managed to get an interview. I remember kind of waiting for the job interview, and kind of met one of the other candidates for the same job, and he was telling me about how he got a first from Cambridge, and I thought, there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to kind of get onto this program if this is the competition that I was up against. Probably the first time that I've really had that kind of imposter syndrome, where I felt like, okay, I'm out of my depth. But I found out a few months later that I did get the job. One of the guys in my group kind of perhaps a little bit of academic snobbery there about the fact that I got the job when there were other kind of better candidates on paper, said that obviously my enthusiasm for the role carried me through. So it was a little bit of a backhanded compliment, I think. But I absolutely was enthusiastic about space and about kind of science and the kind of projects and programs that were being developed by the European Space Agency. So absolutely, absolutely enthusiasm carried me through that. First day on the job then out in the Netherlands. So we were introduced to the other young graduate trainees. At the time, there were around about 50 of us who started on the same day. And I went and sat down next to a kind of a girl who'd also kind of got onto the program, and we were introducing ourselves to each other. And she asked me, did I have a girlfriend? And I said, I don't have a girlfriend, but I also don't have a boyfriend, but I am gay. And there was almost a kind of a moment of horror on her face, and she kind of leaned in and kind of said in quite hushed tones, she said, I'm absolutely fine with that, but for goodness sake, don't tell anybody else about that, because it will really damage your career. She said, don't tell anybody. And I kind of had gone to the Netherlands thinking, okay, great reputation, for being out and proud, a place where, there are lots of gay people, and, the Netherlands is known for a lot of kind of gay people in Amsterdam. Looking forward to kind of living my kind of open gay life. And with that one sentence from that girl that I met on day one, kind of slammed me straight back into that closet, and really affected the way in which I kind of lived my life and lived my career throughout all of my time in the space sector, really until quite recently, where I wasn't very open. I tried to control very hard who knew about me and my private life, and essentially created a bit of a double life for myself, where I wasn't very open with people unless I knew I trusted them very well in the workplace, because her view that it would damage my career kind of really affected me, because my career was very important. European Space Agency was a bit of a different place back then. It was also extremely misogynistic. I have it on good authority that it's nowhere near as bad as that today. I'm happy to say, although I'm sure the kind of everyday sexism that all kind of women experience are still prevalent, in what is still a very male-dominated environment. One of my friends, kind of who was one of my girlfriends on the YGT program, for example, was called into her boss's office on a summer day, and her boss called her out for wearing a top that he said was too revealing. He said, "You shouldn't be coming into work like that, because after all, I am just a man." That's kind of one of the kind of shocking things that I heard when I was out there. We were at the Christmas party, and another one of my friends had to go and take a camera off a man because he kept taking photos of her. I remember kind of just chatting to some friends in the corridor out in S-Tech and seeing a group of men stop to kind of slowly watch one of the female administrative assistants kind of walk past. It was a little bit creepy, to be honest. But I have it on good authority that it isn't quite as bad as that today, thank goodness. After my traineeship there, I kind of wanted to go back and do a PhD. My tutor was still holding me back, but luckily I kind of got quite a good reputation while I was at ESA, and they offered to kind of pay for me to go back to do my PhD. So they sponsored me and sent me back to Leicester to work on the Bepi Colombo program. Excuse me. So yeah, there I was back at Leicester. Very different place, going back somewhere to do your PhD after doing your undergraduate there, I will say. So even though I kind of loved my time there as a PhD student, it was much more like work than it was like being a student. It was much harder to meet people, because as a PhD student, you're often spending most of your time with researchers and professors who are usually a little bit older than you. They've got families, they've settled down. The social life is very different. Universities don't necessarily kind of help you in your journey to kind of find friends as a PhD student. So that was a little bit challenging. But and also I had my memories of what it was like to be a kind of an undergraduate there, and it didn't quite live up to that. But one thing that did happen to me while I was doing my PhD was that I met Matt, so the guy on the right-hand side there with me on graduation. So Matt got into a relationship with Matt, and 15, 16 years on, I'm still in a relationship with Matt. So I'd say, I absolutely found my kind of life partner while I was back at Leicester doing my PhD. Thoroughly enjoyed my time at the university, but realized that actually academia wasn't really for me. I'd kind of experienced the slightly faster pace of the European Space Agency, and kind of wanted to kind of go back into the industry, really. I think that's really where I saw my career. And took the decision at that point to kind of start looking outside of academia. So rather than kind of looking for postdocs, go and find a job. So as often happens when you're doing a PhD, you're invited to do one of these kind of grad school kind of training away, weekend away or 4 days away or whatever. And so I went on one of these grad school trips. And one of the things that they had us do was to kind of write a CV. So I returned from the grad school with this kind of like CV kind of mocked up, and thought, okay, I'm just going to stick it onto a job site, given that I have it. And within 24 hours, I was contacted by a recruiter from Astrium. So Astrium then became Airbus Defence and Space. Pretty much headhunted straight away from my CV. And it was only 2.5 years into my PhD, so I still had 6 months left. The recruiter convinced me to go to my job interview. I got the job at Astrium, Airbus as it is now, and they were willing to kind of defer entry for that job for 6 months while I finished taking all of my data. I hadn't quite finished writing up by then, and in fact, it took me a good sort of a year and a half to complete writing up my PhD while I was working. And again, kudos to anyone at the Open University who manages to do any sort of degree or PhD while in a full-time job, because writing up a PhD while working was a nightmare, was really hard. And if you have an option to not do that, I would recommend it. But kudos to those of you who do it. So my kind of early career then at Airbus Defence and Space, I was a direct entry rather than on the graduate program, because I'd had my PhD and I'd also done a couple of years at the European Space Agency. So I was taken on as a kind of a space mission designer, kind of straight into the sort of job that I kind of really wanted to do when I grew up. It was my first job straight out of university, firstly when I trained at ESA, and then doing proper projects for Astrium, for Airbus. I was the system engineer on a number of really interesting missions. So the International X-ray Observatory, which has now become Athena. I worked on Plato, I worked on Euclid. I did some really interesting R&D work around asteroid deflection. I worked on Mars sample return. So I kind of involved in lots of really cool missions. I realized, I guess, that there were certain elements of engineering that I didn't like, things like, the masses of paperwork and requirements tracking and all of that sort of stuff. But I did really like the kind of creative aspects of the job, the research and development stuff, the kind of preparing for future missions and the technology development required to kind of prepare the company to win the work against other companies, and started to get a bit of a bug for the commercial element of the space business. And also at the time, in my private life, started to get a little bit more involved in kind of local politics. I joined the Liberal Democrats, not least because of their kind of focus on kind of equalities. And actually, the time I joined, it was before the election, where the Liberal Democrats joined the Conservatives in the coalition government. But at that point, I'd moved down to London. My partner Matt got a job at the BBC, so we moved down to London from Hertfordshire, where we were based. And my local MP was Lynn Featherstone, who went on to become the Minister for Equalities in the coalition government, and she was adamant that she was going to push through equal marriage. And so I worked very closely with her, and eventually became her campaign manager, actually, and kind of worked with her as she was pushing through the kind of equal marriage legislation through Parliament. So that was a real kind of highlight in my kind of personal life, I'd say. And I guess the kind of my involvement in politics also meant that I started to get a little bit more involved in the kind of politics of space. And my ability to kind of talk to politicians, largely because of the work that I was doing with Lynn and the work that she was doing in Parliament, meant that Airbus realised that actually I was quite a good person to start getting involved in some of the lobbying efforts that the space industry was doing at the time, to try and kind of get a new space agency. The UK Space Agency at this point didn't even exist. So I got a little bit involved in the politics of space around this time as well. So I moved from the kind of science side across to the more commercial side in Airbus, and spent a couple of years kind of on that side of the business, kind of looking after new development of commercial services in things like Earth observation. We were doing greenhouse gas emissions measurement service and things like that. And then an opportunity came up for me to kind of leave Airbus and join Innovate UK. So at the time it was called the TSB, Technology Strategy Board. It became Innovate UK a couple of years after I joined. Innovate is the UK government's innovation agency. It was kind of at the real kind of forefront of driving kind of government policy around space, so very involved with the UK Space Agency, which at that point had been formed, when it came to setting national space strategy and deciding on how to invest UK government money in companies to deliver the commercial growth that the space industry was offering the economy. So part of my job when I was at Innovate was to run part of the UK Space Agency's program. So I was the delegate to the European Space Agency's technology, the JCB it's called. It's the kind of organization that manages the telecommunications program. So you can see at the top, there's this kind of like massive table where you get to sit with your country's name in front of you, and you get to say grand things like the UK believes that, or the UK would like ESA to do, and you get to kind of make grand statements like that. That was really exciting. That was the kind of political part, the diplomatic part of the job. The other part of the job was to invest in companies. So as I mentioned at the start, I was investing 100 million a year in the UK economy and in businesses in the space side, but also got very involved in some of the skills work that we were doing and some of the diversity work that we were doing. I helped push through our Women in Innovation competition. I was volunteering for the Social Mobility Foundation. That was really lovely, kind of helping kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, just like myself, young people who were caring for parents who were disabled or came from kind of homes, single parent homes like myself, but were very capable and very clever, and indeed kind of, much cleverer than I ever was. Just helping them get into universities, because again, like me, they went to schools where there was no expectation that they would go on to university, and weren't really getting any support for writing personal statements or CVs and stuff like that. So that was a really kind of worthy thing for me to kind of get involved with. And if you're interested in kind of social mobility, then I would highly recommend kind of checking them out. I also went back to UK SEDS and kind of joined their board as a trustee, and I did that for a few years and helped them with some of their kind of the skills work that they were doing. And then one of the things that I've done since then, really, so now that after leaving Innovate and kind of joining SatixFy, I was asked to join the UK Space Agency, UK Space kind of joint board on the space sector. So the Space Skills Advisory Group to look after the diversity element of what they do. Some of you might have seen that there was a census that was released where we were kind of trying to find out the demographics of the UK space sector. So I was responsible for kickstarting that and commissioning that from a really good organization looking after space skills, and they've been releasing some really interesting reports on the kind of makeup of the sector. Very highly recommend kind of reading some of that stuff. They've released a really interesting report on the kind of the split between men and women within the sector, the pay gap. So there's lots of really cool stuff coming out on that. So I'm still very much involved in the kind of drive for kind of improving diversity and skills within the space sector. So kind of, I guess, just going to end this just with a little bit of time for some chat and some questions. Just to say that my life now is great. Really enjoying my life. My sister also came out as gay. So for a few years ago, forgot to mention that too. So there's my lovely gay family in the middle. There's my brother and his husband, myself and my partner, my sister and her partner, and my two nephews, my sister's children. My mother at the bottom right with me and my brother and my partner at London Pride. I got to see my brother get married with all of our friends and family. So home life is really good now, really lovely. And we have two cats, Bob and Evie, named after our two favorite drag queens. So it's kind of lovely and nice for us. But I wanted to kind of end on a bit of a kind of a reality check about kind of I guess some of the kind of the pendulum is swinging, it feels, again against the LGBT community a little bit, and these are just some headlines that have been kind of drawn from the press within the last 12 months, really, or 18 months. You can see that there seems to be a new trend within the press, in particular, and also filtering through to government and government policy that feels quite anti-LGBT. Particularly anti-T, so anti-trans. All of the kind of articles that you see here, all the headlines which seem to focus on trans exclusion and anti-trans sentiment, they're all kind of arguments that we used against the gay community. And so I will say that even though it feels great for me as a gay man, kind of my life seems rosy and lovely, for many people within the LGBT community, that isn't the case, and their kind of lived experience is getting worse, not getting better. So really, this is just a kind of a reminder for those of us that the kind of work isn't done. If you're interested in kind of diversity and kind of LGBT politics and things like that, yeah, absolutely, the work isn't done. And you know, please be an ally to to the LGBT community in you know, as a whole, because you know, fundamentally, you know, people who are who are funding these kind of like anti-trans movements, they're no friend of gay people, and they're no friend of women, and they're no friend of people of color. So yeah, just bear that in mind. That's everything that I wanted to talk about today. So any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, can you hear me?